You've entered Interstellar Chronicles. Close your eyes and drift into another world, a place where stars whisper forgotten names, where time folds and destinies collide across galaxies. Your journey begins now. The average human met a fierce alien commander and found an unlikely love HFY sci-fi story. The moment the Thalith High Council announced they would allow a human envoy to enter Dominion space, half the galaxy laughed. The other half held its breath. From the gleaming spires of the Ivorex combined to the asteroid temples of the Vuric monks, everyone knew one truth. Humans were too soft for real diplomacy, not cunning enough for politics, not brutal enough for war. Curious, yes. Stubborn, perhaps. But when real power sat across the negotiation table, no one expected Earth's representative to be anything more than a polite delay. They were wrong. His name was Marcus Hayes, and this is how he changed the stars. The Dominion vessel Varkish was a beast of black alloy and burning engines, gliding like a predator through the void. Its command deck shimmered in ultraviolet hues, calibrated to the dominant spectrum of its species. Light danced along massive columns engraved with the victories of 1,000 generations. Bloodlines, conquests, duels that shattered moons. High Commander Lyrith Valcor stood at the helm, arms crossed behind her back, armor humming faintly with her body's electric field. Her skin shimmered bronze, her eyes a cold violet, focused on the holographic feed of the arriving envoy. Marcus Hayes, human male, no armor, no weapons, modest height, fragile-looking build, pale skin flushed from the artificial gravity of the transit ship. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and his expression was calm, not brave, not terrified, just present. Lyritha's lip curled. "This is what they send us?" Her voice was sharp, and even her war-hardened adjutant flinched slightly at the venom behind it. "A civilian?" she asked aloud, her voice echoing off the hard walls. "The Terrans send an unarmed linguist to negotiate a military treaty?" The bridge crew murmured. A few chuckled under their breath. But Lyrith didn't laugh. She watched. Something in his posture, in the way he surveyed the docking bay as he stepped from his vessel, told her this man was not here to grovel. Marcus had never seen anything like the Varkish. The size alone was staggering, but it wasn't the raw engineering that caught him. It was the way everything had meaning. The placement of banners, the grooves in the floor, the scent of incense near the airlocks, like something ancient carried forward on purpose. A culture built on pride and blood and memory. He adjusted his Earth Alliance tunic and stepped forward, escorted by 4 guards who eyed him like a curiosity. Not hostile, not yet. Lyrith stood waiting. Even before she spoke, Marcus felt her presence. A pressure in the room, a kind of gravity. She was tall, easily over 6 feet, and her armor was ceremonial and functional both. Eyes like amethyst. Her gaze burned through him. "Envoy Hayes," she said, her voice a command in itself. "Do you know where you are?" Marcus smiled faintly. "On board the Varkish, flagship of the Dominion's 5th flame. It's an honor." That amused her. "You've studied our culture?" "A little," he said, tilting his head. "Enough to know you're not fond of weakness." Lyrith stepped closer, circling him like a hawk. "And yet you bring no weapons, no guards, no armor." Marcus met her gaze. "If I bring a weapon, you see a threat. If I bring a guard, you see distrust. If I come as I am, maybe you'll see me." A pause. A long one. Lyrith didn't smile, but she didn't sneer either. "Very well," she said. "You may speak." The negotiations began that day, but they weren't really negotiations. Not at first. It was a test. Lyrith brought him before the war circle, 6 Thalith elders who had fought for centuries. They grilled him with questions laced with barbs. Hypotheticals meant to provoke aggression. Cultural traps meant to humiliate him. Marcus answered every question with calm precision. He didn't match their aggression. He redirected it, reframed it. When they mocked Earth's short history, he spoke of the speed at which humans adapted. When they challenged Earth's lack of military strength, he spoke of human tenacity, how they'd survived not by domination, but by outlasting their own mistakes. One elder scoffed. What strength is there in surviving? Marcus looked at him and said, Ask a soldier who's outlived a war. Lirith watched. First she thought it was luck, or rehearsed answers. But over time she began to see it wasn't artifice. It was something deeper. There was a gravity to Marcus, not the kind that crushes but the kind that pulls. He listened when others spoke, truly listened. He remembered names, noticed details. He learned the Faleth dialects, and within a week, he corrected a war priest's phrasing with perfect syntax. He didn't fight with blades. He fought with understanding. And it worked. She tested him herself. Late one night cycle, she summoned him to the dueling hall. No guards, just the two of them. He arrived curious. She tossed him a training blade. Heavy, too large for him. Defend yourself, she said. Marcus caught it awkwardly. You're serious? You represent your planet. If you bleed here, perhaps I'll understand what your people are made of. He didn't protest. He stood straight, blade in hand, and when she lunged, fast as lightning, he barely blocked in time. His feet stumbled. His arms trembled. But he didn't back down. Again and again, she struck, and he parried, not well, but with stubborn focus. When the blade hit his shoulder, he cried out and dropped the weapon. But he didn't fall. He straightened, met her eyes, and said through clenched teeth, Again. Something shifted in her chest. She did not strike again. Lirith stood there, the tip of her blade hovering near Marcus's chest. Her breathing was steady, but inside her, something coiled tight. He hadn't won, but he hadn't surrendered either, and that mattered. She lowered the weapon slowly, eyes locked on his, and said only, Enough. Marcus exhaled. His shirt was torn, shoulder bruised, hair clinging to his forehead from sweat. He looked ridiculous compared to her, this towering symbol of martial perfection. But in that moment, Lirith saw no humiliation in him. She saw defiance and heart, not arrogance, conviction, the kind of strength her people had no word for. Over the following weeks, the air aboard the Varkish changed. Faleth officers stopped smirking when Marcus passed. They started listening when he spoke. He visited the engine core with the chief mechanic, not to correct anything, but to admire the craftsmanship. He asked to taste the food grown in nutrient tanks, even though it smelled like boiled minerals. He watched the warrior rituals without flinching, even when they involved blood. He respected them, not as curiosities, not as threats, but as people. And Lirith found herself seeking him out more often, not for strategy, not for diplomacy, but to talk. To sit in the observatory and exchange stories. He told her about Earth, about mountain forests and crashing oceans, about music composed in the dark, about cities that never slept and languages that shaped how people felt. And she listened, really listened. One evening, beneath the crimson light of the dying star Kavik store, they sat alone in the Arboretum chamber. Lirith had allowed him access, though it was considered a sacred space. A garden of genetically preserved flora from the Faleth homeworld. Marcus knelt beside a twisting vine and ran a finger gently over a bioluminescent leaf. It's beautiful, he murmured. Lirith stood beside him, arms folded, watching, always watching. It's a memory, she said, of a world we can never return to. He looked up at her, face softened by the glow. I think that's what makes it sacred. Silence. Then, do you ever regret it? He asked. Regret what? The path they chose for you, the battles, the legacy. Lirith tilted her head. Regret is not a concept my people value. Marcus just smiled gently. That's not what I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted across the garden, to the carved walls, to the echoes of memory in the stillness. Then quietly, I wonder, sometimes, what I would have been if I'd been born somewhere else. Someone else. That's a kind of regret, Marcus said. Or maybe hope. She turned to him. Their eyes met. It was not the first time, but it was the first time they lingered. And something passed between them. Not words, not customs, just recognition. But peace is never without price. Back on the homeworld, whispers spread like fire in dry wind. The High Command had begun to view Lyrith's tolerance of the human with suspicion. Sentiment clouds judgment, they said. Emotion weakens the chain of command. One counselor, Vor Akahan, a rival of Lyrith's family, declared openly, "She forgets what it means to be Thaleth. Let her choose between this earthling and her throne." Lyrith confronted Marcus that night. She didn't shout. She didn't scold. She simply stood there, stiff and unreadable, and said, "You must leave." Marcus blinked, startled. "What? They're calling for your removal. Or mine. If you stay, I lose my command, my honor, my bloodline." He looked at her for a long time. Then, "Do you want me to leave?" "I want peace. That's not what I asked." Her fists clenched. "I want to stop waking up wondering if you're still here, if you're still breathing. I want to stop thinking about what your voice sounds like when you say my name." The words spilled like something torn from a deeper place than she'd ever spoken from. "I want to stop feeling like I am not enough for my people and too much for you." Marcus stepped closer, slowly. "You're not too much for me," he said. "You're the first person I've ever met who makes me feel like being human is enough." Lyrith's breath hitched. She turned away. "If I protect you now," she whispered, "I'll lose everything." Marcus swallowed hard. "Then let me earn it." The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. Lyrith didn't speak to Marcus directly again. Not in public. Not where eyes followed her every step and whispers clung like frost to the steel walls of the Varkish. But she watched him. She watched how he carried on despite the cold stares from officers who had once come to respect him. How he didn't flinch when his access was limited, or when ceremonial guards now escorted him with a little more aggression in their silence. He wasn't trying to reclaim ground. He was enduring. For her, that night, she stood alone in the dueling hall again, replaying their last conversation in her head until it hurt, until she could hear his voice when she closed her eyes. "Then let me earn it." She hated that part of her wanted to let him try. Meanwhile, Marcus had made a choice. If he was going to be forced out of the Dominion, he wouldn't leave as a diplomat who failed. He'd leave as a human who made a dent, who proved something. So he took a risk. He hacked into the Dominion's historical archives, not to steal, but to understand. He accessed old battle records, cultural treaties, accounts of forgotten civil uprisings that had almost broken the Thaleth's grip on nearby systems. He found patterns, fault lines, mistakes repeated under different names. And in those mistakes, he saw opportunity. One of the systems under Dominion Watch Tyrax 4 was on the brink of open rebellion again. The signs were clear to him. Energy spikes near the equator colonies, black market comms to the Navari insurgents, strategic troop movements disguised as resupply missions. The Thaleth command had missed it, or ignored it. Marcus didn't. He sent a direct communique to Lyrith. Not through protocol, not through channels. Straight to her personal console. A single sentence. "If Tyrax falls, your enemies will use it to strip you of everything. I can help you stop it." She came to him that same cycle, eyes like stormlight, furious and focused. "You accessed classified military intelligence," she snapped. "I accessed a crisis you're pretending isn't happening," Marcus replied evenly. "You jeopardized everything. I protected your legacy before it became a tombstone." He took a breath. "Just give me a chance to prove I'm not just here to survive you. I'm here to stand beside you." Lyrith stared at him. He was the only being she'd ever known who could speak to her like that. Not as a superior, not as a soldier, but as an equal. No flattery, no fear, just truth. And God's help her. She needed someone to speak the truth. They left that night. Not in a fleet, not with banners. Just the two of them. Lyrith in her war gear. Marcus in a reconfigured Thaleth flight suit that didn't quite fit. Their vessel was a strike-class interceptor, stripped for speed. As they dropped out of slit space above Tyrax 4, Lyrith saw the truth in his warning. Smoke rose from the colony cities. An Navari dreadnought drifted just outside Dominion radar range, cloaked in old but deadly stealth tech. This wasn't a riot. It was an invasion in progress. She looked at Marcus. How did you know? He didn't answer immediately. He was busy recalibrating the sensor array, fingers flying. Finally, because I've seen this playbook. On Earth, our enemies don't always come with armies. Sometimes they come with narratives. And by the time we respond, they've already written the ending. Lirith nodded slowly, then handed him the auxiliary controls. Then let's rewrite it. The battle that followed was chaos. Not the kind the Dominion glorified, ceremonial, honorable, structured, but messy human chaos. Improvisation, recklessness, genius. Lirith led the charge through the lower orbit defenses, carving a hole with pulse lances and daring proximity maneuvers. Marcus, patched into the Navari comms, used mistranslated signals to redirect their troop drops, sending 2 brigades straight into Dominion traps. They fought together, her with fire and fury, him with thought and intuition. And slowly, the rebellion buckled. The dreadnought was disabled when Marcus redirected a Dominion orbital station's mining lasers. A move so insane Lirith laughed out loud when it worked. Do all humans fight like this? She asked mid-dive. He grinned. Only the ones in love. She went still, just for a second, then returned fire on a retreating bomber with a smile of her own. When the dust settled, the Dominion High Command couldn't deny her anymore. Tyrax 4 had been saved, not just through strength, but through insight, diplomacy, and understanding. The qualities Marcus had brought. Lirith received official commendation for preserving the unity of the Outer Rim colonies. But everyone knew the truth. She hadn't just saved the Dominion, she changed it. Weeks later, back aboard the Varkish, Lirith stood before the war circle again. This time, not as a warrior accused of betrayal, but as a leader with results none could refute. I stand by my decision, she said to them, and I will continue to stand by it. A murmur rose among the council. One elder asked, You risked everything. For a human. Lirith looked out the massive window behind her, where Marcus stood watching the stars, arms crossed, waiting. I didn't risk everything, she said. I chose everything. That night, she found him on the garden deck again, the one with the bioluminescent vines and the flickering pulse of ancient memories. He didn't speak when she approached, but she did. I used to believe power was born in fire and forged in battle. Marcus turned to her, a gentle smile playing on his lips. And now, she stepped closer, took his hand. Now I believe it starts here, she said, pressing his palm to her chest, where her heart burned brighter than any star. Where someone sees you and still chooses you. He leaned forward. She didn't stop him. Their kiss was quiet. No fireworks, no fanfare. Just 2 souls who had come to understand each other in a galaxy that never thought they should. The galaxy didn't change in a day, but it noticed. After the Tyrax victory, Marcus became more than a footnote. He was invited begrudgingly into closed military briefings. He sat at planning tables where humans had never been allowed. He was spoken of not just as Lirith's companion or pet Terran, but as Hayes the strategist. That didn't mean respect came easy. He still received cold glances from senior officers. Still heard murmurs of emotional influence behind his back. Still walked the Varkish halls knowing that half its crew saw him as a virus in the bloodstream of Thaleth tradition. But Lirith? She never wavered. Not once. One evening, Marcus found her alone in the command chamber. No guards. No attendants. She stood facing the starfield, arms folded behind her back, the violet light of Kellen's eye spilling over her armor like molten silk. He approached quietly. You've been distant lately. She didn't turn. The high circle grows uneasy. Because of us? Because they fear change, she said, then paused. And yes, because of us. Marcus stepped beside her. You could walk away. Now she turned. Her eyes, usually unreadable, shimmered with conflict. I could, she said, and everything would go back to how it was. Order restored. Titles preserved. I could rise higher than even my father ever did. Then why haven't you? She hesitated. And then softly, so soft it was barely more than breath, Because when I imagine the stars without you beside me, they feel empty. Marcus swallowed hard. Lirith, but she raised a hand gently, silencing him. I have faced wars that burned worlds. I have looked gods in the eye and denied them. But you make me question everything I was raised to believe. You're dangerous in a way I was never trained for. He stepped closer, placing a hand on her forearm. Then let's be dangerous together. She smiled, a small, rare thing, and in that silence between them, heavy with feeling, she kissed him again, not as a declaration, but as a promise. But the galaxy is never content to let love thrive without trial. 3 days later, Marcus was abducted. It happened inside Dominion territory, in one of the so-called secure diplomatic corridors. His vessel was en route to a minor cultural summit on Varn Prime, with only a token escort, a show of trust. Lirith had insisted on it. She blamed herself every second afterward. The attackers were cloaked, stealth commandos wearing no insignia, no traceable markings. But Marcus knew who they were. Not rebels, not pirates, Dominion loyalists, the kind that believed Lirith Valcor had betrayed her bloodline by loving the human. They took him to an asteroid base outside any known charts, a brutal, freezing place carved into raw stone and forgotten metal. He was beaten, starved, interrogated, not for secrets. They didn't care what he knew. They cared who he was. You are the rot beneath the blade, their masked leader hissed. You seduced our commander and weakened the spine of Thalith. You are the sickness. Marcus, bruised and bloodied, replied with a cracked-lipped smile. Then I'm in the right place. They didn't understand what he meant, but Lirith did. The moment she received the encoded message, he'd slipped through a corrupted transponder ping. A single line in their private cipher. I'm still standing. She gathered no counsel. She asked no permission. She took her armor, her blade, and a squadron loyal not to her name, but to her cause. They came down on that asteroid like the wrath of old gods. Marcus had nearly collapsed by the time they breached the compound. His wrists were chained, his breath shallow. But when the blast doors blew open and she stood there, haloed in flame and starlight, he smiled. Am I dreaming? He rasped. Lirith knelt beside him, lifting his face with trembling fingers. If you are, she whispered, voice thick, you're not waking up without me. They returned in silence, her arms around him the entire journey. And when he healed, when the medics finished resetting his bones and clearing the damage, she stayed. At his bedside, without armor, without mask, without distance. She was no longer just Lirith the commander. She was Lirith, the woman who loved him, and had almost lost everything to realize it. Back on the Varkish, they stood together before the Dominion Council. Lirith gave no pretense. No more secrets, she said. No more whispering in shadows. I love him. I will not choose between my heart and my duty. I am Thalith. He is human. And if this union offends your pride, then your pride is hollow. The silence in that chamber lasted a full minute. Then came the voice of the oldest counselor, her former enemy, Vor Akehan. He stood slowly, eyes never leaving Marcus. You've proven that the fire of unity may burn hotter than the fire of conquest. I despised your kind, human, but I have seen you bleed for hours. He turned to Lirith, bowed his head. Command well, Lirith Valcor. You have earned your stars. Later, when the two of them stood alone on the observation deck, watching the stars crawl by, Marcus said, that was suicide. Lirith gave him a look. You would have done the same. He smirked. I did, and it got me kidnapped. She laughed, actually laughed, deep and melodic. I love you, he said simply. She touched her forehead to his, something deeply sacred in her culture. And I have loved you, she whispered, since you first stood in my war hole and refused to bow. Thus, a new legacy was born, not in fire, not in conquest, but in love, in shared purpose, in the truth that sometimes the strongest weapon in the galaxy is the heart that refuses to give in. Months passed. The Varkish no longer carried just the banner of the Dominion, it carried hope. Other alien species began to take notice of Lirith and Marcus's union, not as scandal, but as possibility. The Zendari diplomats who once refused to even breathe the same air as a human now asked Marcus to mediate cultural talks. The Athari Council, long thought isolationist beyond redemption, sent observers to the Dominion's borders for the first time in a century. It wasn't peace yet, but it was momentum, and momentum is all a revolution needs. But not everyone celebrated. Far beyond the Dominion's reaches, hidden in fractured space where light barely touched and stars whispered in riddles, the true circle stirred. A secretive order of Thaleth traditionalists, not bound to the council, but to ancient ideals, who believed that Lirith's love for a human was not just treason, it was heresy. Their leader, Escher Mar, a former admiral burned from the archives for executing an entire colony that had fraternized with non-Thaleth life, watched the reports in silence. His eye, long replaced with a gleaming red implant, pulsed with mechanical irritation. "She weakens our legacy," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves. "She infects the blade." The circle responded not with applause, but with stillness. And then, as one, they approved his plan. Marcus knew something was wrong the moment they reached the Karev border summit. The outpost had sent distress signals. Lirith's fleet had answered. What they found wasn't sabotage or rebellion. It was massacre. The summit's delegates, human, Thaleth, Zendari, and others, slaughtered in their chambers. The scene left unmasked, grotesquely ritualistic. A warning, scrawled on the walls in Thaleth blood script. "The blade shall not weep." Lirith read it once, and then she turned to Marcus, face carved from stone. "They're declaring war on us." They returned to the Varkish, called an emergency assembly. Officers debated retaliation. Some even questioned Lirith's judgment. But Marcus, quiet until then, stood unarmed among towering warriors and said, "This isn't just a coup, this is a crusade." He stepped forward, placing a data rod on the table. "I found evidence in the Dominion archives. These attacks aren't new. The Circle has been silencing reformers for decades. This isn't about us, it's about fear. They fear change. They fear a galaxy where strength doesn't mean blood and chains." Lirith looked at him with quiet fire, and then she turned to the council. "I will not let them rewrite our future." They hunted the Circle, system by system, ghost signatures, dead satellites, abandoned moons, and eventually a transmission, a challenge. Escher Mar himself appeared on their screens, his face barely humanoid now, etched with circuitry, armor fused to skin, eyes black as void. He looked at Lirith, then Marcus, and spoke like a dying god. "You wear the skin of my people, Lirith Falcor, but your heart is clay. You let the human poison your soul. You abandoned the blade." Lirith stepped forward. "No," she said. "I forged a new one." The final confrontation took place in the Galactic Rift, an unstable region of collapsing gravity wells. The Circle's fleet was vast, ragged, brutal, ancient. Their ships pulsed with radiation and corrupted tech, as if built from the bones of dead stars. The Dominion forces were outnumbered, but they were not alone, because Lirith had sent a call, not a command, a request, and they came. Zendari hunter cruisers, human tactical vessels, even the nomadic Kirill swarm, whose ships moved like flowing cities, joined them. A coalition born not of treaties but of shared respect and love. The battle was not clean. Lirith led from the front. Marcus, in the command chamber beside her, managed fleet strategy and supply optimization, threading tactics between cultural understandings and brutal realities. At one point, a Kirill vessel broke protocol and veered into a gravity well. Lirith barked, "Leave them. We can't save." But Marcus leaned in. "Trust me." He rerouted 3 Dominion frigates in a maneuver so wild her second-in-command screamed insubordination. But it worked. The Kirill ship escaped, and in return, they sacrificed one of their own ships to protect the Varkish during the final barrage. Lirith turned to him after. "I don't know how you keep doing this." Marcus smiled through sweat and blood. I just think like a human. She looked at him with something deeper than pride. Something eternal. They confronted Escher Mar personally. A boarding team of only 6, Lyrith, Marcus, and 4 elite guards. Inside his throne chamber, carved from star wreck and madness, he stood waiting, blade drawn. You came, he said to Lyrith, to die with your mongrel? Marcus stepped forward. Funny, that's exactly what she said about you. The duel was unlike anything Marcus had seen. Lyrith and Escher moved like lightning forged into form, metal shrieking, void trembling. At one point, Escher drove Lyrith to her knees, blade poised for the kill. And then Marcus stepped between them, unarmed. You already lost, he said quietly. Escher laughed. I am strength incarnate. Marcus nodded. Then why are you alone? The hesitation, a flicker, a pause was all Lyrith needed. Her blade drove through his chest, and the war ended. Not with applause, but with relief. Back aboard the Varkish, Lyrith and Marcus stood alone in the garden again. She wore no armor. He wore no uniform, just skin and silence. I used to believe, she said slowly, that love was a weakness. That connection dulled the edge of the blade. And now, she took his hand. Now I believe love is the fire that tempers steel. He kissed her, no longer like something stolen or uncertain, but like home. And the stars, silent and ancient, bore witness. Some say that was the end, but history remembers it as the beginning. The Dominion evolved, the Circle's influence faded, and the galaxy began tentatively, haltingly, to believe in something new, a shared future, one forged not by domination, but by understanding. And in the center of it always stood 2 figures, a warrior forged in fire, a human who refused to break. Together, 6 months after the fall of the True Circle, Lyrith and Marcus stood before the newly formed Unified Accord, a coalition of Dominion leaders, humans, and independent systems. A new charter had been written, a council to replace the old caste-dominated rule, representation across species. No longer an empire, but a fragile, ambitious union. And Marcus? He was not a soldier anymore, not just a symbol. He was a counselor. Lyrith remained High Commander of the defensive fleets, but the shadows in her eyes had deepened. She still bore the weight of what was lost. The war had taken friends, family, whole histories. She had one piece, but not without scars. The scars between them, though, had only made the bond stronger. Late one night, as they walked through the Varkish's quiet arboretum, a sanctuary now filled with flora from 12 worlds, Marcus said quietly, "You're different lately." She looked at him sidelong. "We've seen too much not to change." "That's not what I mean." He stopped walking, turned to face her fully. "You look tired, but like something's inside you. Something new." Lyrith was silent a long moment, and then softly, so softly he barely caught it, "I think I'm pregnant." The words dropped like a pulse through gravity. Marcus blinked. "What?" "I didn't want to say it until I was sure. Dominion medicine confirmed it. You and I, our species, weren't supposed to be compatible. But we are." He didn't speak, just reached out slowly, cradled her face in both hands. And then he laughed. Not loudly, not hysterically. A quiet, stunned, disbelievingly happy laugh. Lyrith narrowed her eyes. "You're laughing." "I am. Because this wasn't supposed to happen." "Is that bad?" "No," he said, voice trembling. "It's a miracle." Of course, miracles come with consequences. Word of the child spread. Not publicly yet, but among high-level circles. The reaction was not universal awe. The Dominion's old guard whispered again about genetic impurity, destabilization, and precedent. Even some humans were hesitant, afraid. A child born of 2 worlds meant a future where the lines blurred completely, and blurred lines terrify those who rely on borders to feel strong. The death threats began quietly. A hacked drone here, poisoned courier there. Then, a bomb planted in Marcus's diplomatic shuttle, foiled only by a young Thaleth tech officer who sacrificed herself disabling the core. Her name was Terran Vel, and Marcus never forgot it. Lirith buried her with full honors, then ordered a classified internal investigation into the leaks inside the Accord. She was calm, too calm. Marcus knew that look. "You're planning something," he said one night as she stared at the stars, armor half-clasped but unused. "I'm protecting what's mine, and if it means walking the edge of what you once fought against." She looked at him, eyes softer now, no longer forged from ice but still unbreakable. "Then I walk it carefully, with you beside me." Eventually, the truth had to come out. Lirith made the announcement herself, in a live galactic broadcast. No scripts, no councils, just her, standing in full ceremonial uniform, and Marcus beside her, hand in hers. "I carry a child," she said, "born of human and Thaleth blood, and I will raise it not as a weapon, not as a symbol, but as a bridge between what we were and what we could become." Galaxies paused, Dillions watched, and in the silence that followed, a single message flickered in the human embassy's incoming queue, from the chiral swarm of all species. It read, "If the future comes in flesh and blood, then let it come through love. We stand with you." The tide turned. What was scandal became conversation. Conversation became hope. More mixed crews were approved. Joint academies opened. Even the oldest Dominion families began to ask, not demand. The child wasn't just a future. It was proof. In the quiet hours of night, when political battles had paused and starships slept in their orbits, Marcus would rest his head on Lirith's stomach, feel the heartbeat, speak softly, sometimes nonsense, sometimes earth songs, sometimes just this: "You're going to be incredible." Lirith would stroke his hair, holding him in silence. In those moments, the galaxy could burn and they would not care. And then, on a cold dawn orbiting the garden moon of Ilios, in a secure but peaceful medical dome, Lirith gave birth. The child, a girl, emerged not screaming, but blinking, large violet eyes, human soft skin, traces of the iridescent Thaleth shimmer beneath the surface. A daughter born of two worlds. She grasped Marcus's finger instantly, and Lirith wept, not like a warrior, not like a commander, but like a woman who had carried hope through fire and brought it home. They named her Sarah. Old human word, star. Old Thaleth word, between. Between war and peace. Between past and future. Between him and her. Marcus held her in the quiet and whispered, "You don't know it yet, little one, but you're going to change everything." And the galaxy, older than empires, crueler than time, listened, and did not laugh. 15 years later, the galaxy had changed, but not enough. Sarah Valcorthorn had grown tall and live, her presence unmistakable. Violet eyes like her mother's, gaze unflinching, voice soft but unyielding. She had her father's warmth, her mother's steel, and a mind entirely her own. At 17, she was fluent in 9 languages, had trained with Dominion tacticians and human philosophers alike, and carried herself not as a soldier, but as a question the galaxy could not answer. Was she a weapon, a legacy, or something dangerously new? She hated ceremonies, hated the way the diplomats looked at her, like a relic or an omen. At the anniversary of the Accord, she stood beside her parents as leaders from 50 worlds gave speeches she could recite in her sleep. After the 5th toast, she excused herself and found refuge in the open-air spire atop the Unity Hall, where the artificial wind carried the scent of a dozen alien flowers. There, she met someone, or rather, they met her, a young diplomat's aide, alien, neither fully known nor fully present. Name, Kale Urin, from the aquatic HFY. Tall, with translucent skin and a bioluminescent crest that flickered with emotion. They had been assigned to observe, but observed her instead. "You looked like you wanted to scream," Kale said, voice like ripples. Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Most people say hello first. I'm not most people." "No," she said with a wry smirk. "You're honest." They spoke for hours. About history, and peace, and pressure. Kale asked nothing of her, only listened. And when they left, they didn't ask to see her again. They hoped to, and that hope was more powerful than any claim. Sarah began to see cracks in the accord, in the unity her parents fought for. Species who had joined for peace now whispered about cultural dilution. Dominion hardliners resurfaced in remote systems, blaming human softness for military indecision. Even some Earth delegates spoke of reasserting human independence. A new fear was rising, that unity had cost identity, and at the center of that storm was Sarah, too human for some, too alien for others. Then came the tragedy. A human colony ship was destroyed near the Veil Nebula neutral space. No known survivors. All evidence pointed to a rogue Dominion vessel. The Accord demanded answers. The Dominion denied everything. Tensions spiraled. Old hatreds clawed upward. And across every news feed, one question emerged. Where does Sarah stand? They asked her to speak publicly. Her parents warned her gently, you don't owe them this. But she did, because she was the bridge. And bridges must stand even when fire rains on both sides. She stood on the steps of the Accord hull. No armor, no title, just Sarah. And she said, I am not here to defend one species or condemn another. I am here to remind you why we chose unity. Not because it is easy, but because we saw, in each other, something worth saving. Humans are not weak for weeping over the dead. We are not soft for choosing mercy over revenge. If that softness unnerves you, ask yourself why. Because perhaps what we fear is that compassion requires more courage than war. Some called her naive. Some called her dangerous. But others, the ones who mattered, listened. In private, Cale found her in tears. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. I said the truth, she whispered. And I think I made it worse. Cale took her hand, gentle, wet and cold. No, you showed them who you are. Now let them choose who they want to be. And for the first time in weeks, Sarah smiled. But peace does not come from speeches. It comes from action. And someone in the shadows wanted her gone. An attempt on her life. Not crude, surgical, political, a sabotaged shuttle, a falsified maintenance report, a delay in rescue response. She survived only because Cale noticed a temperature shift in the ship's fusion lines minutes before launch. They dragged her from the cabin seconds before detonation. It was not her mother who interrogated the saboteur. It was Sarah, and she did not raise her voice once. Who sent you? She asked. The prisoner, human, former Earth nationalist militia. Spat. You're not real. You're an abomination. Sarah stepped closer. I'm the future, he sneered. No future built on weakness lasts. She leaned in, voice cold, but not cruel. You call compassion weakness. I call it the thing that made my father step in front of a blade instead of running. That made my mother spare an enemy's life when she had every reason not to. She rose. And if that scares you, then maybe it should. The man never spoke again. But the message was clear. There would be more. The closer she got to becoming real in the galaxy's eyes. Not a child, not a symbol, but a leader. The more those who thrived on fear would try to break her. One night, she stood alone in the garden her father built aboard the Varkish. Marcus found her there, older now, his hair more gray than not. You always come here when it hurts, he said. I come here when I don't know who I am. He smiled gently. I'll tell you who you are. She looked at him, eyes glimmering. You're my daughter, Lyritha's daughter. But more than that, you're the first person in 1,000 years who made everyone uncomfortable enough to think. He touched her shoulder. And that is power. The war that didn't start. It began with a fleet movement. Just 4 ships. Unmarked. Fast. Slipping past the Accord's border sensors near the Dracian Divide. A cluster of asteroid mining colonies held in fragile balance between Dominion and independent powers. They attacked a listening post. No survivors. The attackers vanished into deep space before any ID scan could complete. But the wreckage held clues. Weapon signatures matched both Dominion and Earth designs. Too perfect. Too symmetrical. It was a frame job. Someone was trying to start a war. Not between 2 enemies, but between friends. The Accord splintered overnight. Old prejudices reignited. On the council floor, voices rose. Accusation, threats, doomsday scenarios. Lirith called for calm. Marcus begged for time. But only one voice cut through the noise. Silius. She stood. No weapons. No titles. But she didn't ask to speak. She spoke. This is manufactured. Someone wants us at each other's throats. Someone who fears what we've built. And if we go to war now, we prove them right. I will not let my generation inherit a galaxy of rubble because the last one couldn't listen. They shouted her down. But not all of them. 2 systems walked out. 3 stayed. 1 sent reinforcements to protect her. That night, in her private chamber, Kale found her sitting at the edge of her cot. Silent. Why do they listen only when they're afraid? She whispered. Kale sat beside her, their bioluminescence dim. Because fear is louder than love. Sarah looked at them. I'm tired of being a symbol. I want to act. Then act, Kale said. But don't act like them. She leaned into them. I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to fix it. You just have to keep it from breaking completely. That's enough. That's always been enough. The following week, Sarah made the most dangerous decision of her life. She traveled, alone, to the last place the rogue ships were traced to, the wastes of Howrix, a lawless zone beyond Dominion reach. She brought no guards, no warship, only Kale, and a signal beacon transmitting live to Accord networks. If I don't come back, she told her mother, let them see who I trusted, who I became. Lirith held her for a long time. Come back. I'll try. The wastes were chaos incarnate. Junkers, pirates, militia remnants, and, hidden among them, the architects of war. She found them after 4 days. A faction known as the Red Spiral, not loyal to any flag, funded by corporations, fanatics, and fearmongers alike. They had one goal: destabilize unity. Why? Because peace doesn't pay, their leader said. A human, former Accord general, disgraced, twisted by ideology. You think you're the future? He sneered. You're a genetic PR stunt. Sarah didn't argue. She listened, and when he finished, she said only, you're wrong, and played, over the live feed, a message from a Dracian orphan, a child who lost her parents in the recent attack. I don't know why people hate each other, but I want the lady with the violet eyes to fix it. Millions watched, billions, and for once they wept together. The spiral's support evaporated overnight. Armies once willing to die for fear hesitated in the face of her words, because what Sarah gave them wasn't shame. It was a mirror, and sometimes that's worse than any weapon. 6 months later, a new accord was signed, more inclusive, less militarized. A shared intelligence agency now tracked destabilization threats before they grew. And Sarah? She stood beside Kale, now her partner in every sense. Political, emotional, spiritual. They weren't married. Their cultures didn't need that word. They were bonded. And they were expecting. Not a child of war, but one of quiet revolution. In the end, Lirith retired. Marcus returned to Earth, tending to a small orbital garden. Sarah became first delegate of the Accord, the youngest in history, not because she demanded power, but because, when everyone else reached for fear, she held out her hand. She stood one last time in front of the galaxy. No crisis, no battle, just memory. I was born of contradiction, raised between silence and war. But the thing I remember most is my father singing to me in the dark. The galaxy will always have darkness. So keep singing, even if your voice trembles. The galaxy did not forget her. They called her Sarah the Gentle, the unbroken thread, the heir of both sons. But Kale, they just called her Love. And in the end, that was the only name that mattered.